He built a billion-dollar empire, but one flight attendant's glare was enough to strip him of his dignity. What happened next turned the entire airline industry upside down, and no one saw it coming. Watch till the end to see how one man's quiet revenge transformed the skies forever. Before we start, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The morning sky over Washington National Airport carried the muted gray of early winter, a light mist clinging to the tarmac and wrapping the terminal in a soft haze. Inside the sleek black sedan that pulled to the curb, Elijah Sterling sat in stillness, the hum of the vehicle's quiet engine barely perceptible against the distant roar of departing planes. At 42, he exuded a calm born of hard battles fought and won. His tailored overcoat, carefully pressed suit, and understated platinum cufflinks spoke not of ostentation, but of quiet power. Few in the bustling crowd knew his name, yet those who did understood that he was the architect of one of the most innovative biotechnology empires in the world, a man who had built sterling innovations from nothing but intellect, grit, and an unwavering belief in transformation. He stepped out into the frigid air, gripping the handle of his carry-on with deliberate composure. The terminal buzzed with the early chaos of business travelers, families herding children, and hurried announcements echoing off vaulted ceilings. Elijah moved with unhurried purpose, his measured pace belying the storm of vigilance that constantly circled his thoughts. Years in boardrooms and hostile negotiations had taught him how to see everything without appearing to look. The subtle tightening of a traveler's hand on a handbag, the way security eyes lingered on him just a fraction longer than others. The hushed murmurs that carried fragments of assumption cloaked as casual observation. The first-class check-in counter loomed ahead, polished counters gleaming beneath clinical lighting. Behind them stood Cassandra Blake, the long-tenured manager of premium services, her posture stiff with the self-importance of someone who had spent decades guarding spaces she deemed exclusive. Her sharp eyes flickered over Elijah as he approached, her expression tightening into a polite mask that failed to conceal her doubt. In her gaze lingered the unspoken calculation wealth rarely looked like him in her world. Though his suit bore the impeccable lines of bespoke tailoring and his passport carried the insignia of elite travel, none of it softened the quiet prejudice etched into her features. Elijah offered his credentials with the calm professionalism that had become second nature. He had performed this ritual countless times, boarding passes, identification, a courteous greeting, and yet each time he braced for the possibility of friction. Cassandra accepted the documents with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them a beat longer than necessary, as if willing some flaw to reveal itself. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard with deliberate slowness, typing with the performative caution of one determined to prove vigilance rather than efficiency. The air around them shifted as nearby travelers sensed the tension, their peripheral glances lingering just long enough to feed the silent spectacle. When she finally handed back the boarding pass, her forced smile carried no warmth. The words she spoke were polite, but the undertone was unmistakable, her emphasis on certain syllables laced with condescension. Elijah thanked her with quiet grace. Turning toward the premium security lane, he had learned long ago that responding to such subtle hostilities only fueled them. Dignity, he understood, was its own form of resistance. The security checkpoint was no kinder. The random screenings that always seemed to find him were statistically improbable, yet persistently reliable. The secondary pat-down was performed with clinical detachment, the officer's expression unreadable as Elijah endured the ritual humiliation with practiced serenity. When at last he emerged into the quieter corridors leading toward the exclusive lounge, he adjusted his cufflinks not out of vanity, but as a grounding gesture, a small reminder of control amid a system that sought to erode it. The first-class lounge stood ahead, a sanctuary of muted opulence plush seating, soft lighting, the faint aroma of freshly ground coffee mingling with the sterile scent of polished marble. Elijah's boarding pass had cleared him for entry, his frequent flyer status granting him privileges few attained. Yet as he approached the podium, Cassandra reappeared, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She intercepted the young attendant poised to greet him, asserting herself with an air of authority sharpened by suspicion. Her eyes scanned his documents again, searching for any pretext to challenge his presence in this rarefied space. Passengers nearby slowed their pace, curiosity piqued by the quiet confrontation unfolding before them. The weight of their silent judgment pressed in from all sides, whispered speculations, darting glances, the subtle smirks of those quick to assume wrongdoing. Cassandra's questions, framed as procedural, carried an unmistakable insinuation. Why was he here? Could he afford this? Was the ticket truly his? Each query dripped with disbelief disguised as diligence. Elijah's composure remained unbroken, his features carved into the serene mask of a man who refused to yield dignity, even as indignity pressed against him. Security was summoned. The tall supervisor, Victor Grant, approached with professional restraint, his military posture hinting at a career spent balancing duty against conscience. He reviewed the documents, found them in perfect order, and yet, bound by the complaint lodged by Cassandra, requested that Elijah accompany him for additional verification. The optics were unmistakable and escorted removal, a public questioning of legitimacy that no suit or title could shield him from. Smartphones lifted discreetly, capturing the moment in shaky frames destined for social media. Among the silent witnesses stood Mark Lawrence, a wide-eyed intern whose admiration for Elijah Sterling bordered on reverence. He recognized the man instantly, recalling lectures about his breakthroughs in medical AI, his story of rising from foster care to billionaire innovator. Shock mingled with quiet outrage as Mark recorded what others would later share in disbelief. In the sterile confines of the security office, Elijah endured the familiar protocols. Questions asked with feigned neutrality, documents examined and re-examined, the silent suggestion that he did not belong. He answered calmly, offered no protest, yet beneath the surface, calculation stirred. He had prepared for moments like this, not because they were rare, but because they were inevitable. Injustice, he had learned, seldom arrived with fanfare. It crept in quietly, masked as procedure, cloaked in plausible deniability. But today, this moment would not vanish into anonymity like countless others before it. When the questioning concluded and he was grudgingly cleared, Elijah exited the office with the same quiet dignity he had entered. His flight would depart soon, and outwardly, nothing had changed. Yet as he descended the terminal corridor toward his gate, he retrieved his phone and sent a single coded message to his most trusted confidant. Project Aegis, observation mode. Across the city in a secure operations room belonging to Sterling Innovations, a team of specialists came to life. Servers hummed awake, encrypted channels flickered with incoming data, and the calm voice of Alexis Moore, head of global security, acknowledged the command. The incident at the lounge was no longer just an indignity, it was the opening act of something far greater. By the time Elijah's plane touched down in San Francisco, the first ripples had already begun to spread. The video captured by Mark had gone viral, sparking a wave of outrage under the hashtag #FlyWhileBlack, a digital reckoning that threatened to engulf Sky Dominion Airlines. Corporate spokespeople scrambled to draft statements of apology, dismissing the confrontation as an isolated misunderstanding. But Elijah knew better. He recognized patterns where others saw coincidence. This was not about one employee or one moment. It was about a system, a culture, an entrenched arrogance that had thrived unchecked for decades. As the city lights of San Francisco glittered against the night horizon, Elijah's resolve hardened. The humiliation he endured would not be forgotten, not for revenge but for accountability. A reckoning was coming, and this time it would not end with a press release or a settlement. This time it would transform everything. The aftermath of the lounge incident unfolded with the velocity of a storm, spreading across digital landscapes faster than corporate spokespeople could craft denials. Within hours of Elijah Sterling's quiet removal from the first-class lounge, grainy cell phone footage of the event dominated social media feeds. The images, though imperfect, captured the essence of what had transpired. A man of quiet composure confronted by suspicion he had done nothing to earn, a removal conducted under the pretense of protocol, and a silent crowd bearing witness without intervention. Hashtags multiplied. Fly while black, Sky Dominion exposed, and justice for Elijah trended simultaneously, each carrying fragments of outrage, disbelief, and painful familiarity. Mainstream media outlets quickly followed. Morning news programs aired the footage alongside commentary from diversity advocates and legal analysts, dissecting the implications. Talk radio hosts debated whether this was a misunderstanding or evidence of systemic bias. Cable panels convened hastily, framing the incident as the latest flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about race, privilege, and corporate accountability. For many, Elijah's quiet dignity contrasted sharply with the overt hostility he had endured, amplifying the public resonance of his story. He was not merely a billionaire mistreated in a moment of carelessness. He was a symbol of countless similar indignities faced by those without wealth or fame to shield them. Inside Sterling Innovations, the response was neither reactive nor chaotic. Under Elijah's direction, a quiet and methodical operation began. His coded message project Aegis signaled the activation of a carefully prepared contingency, an investigation not just into the actions of one employee, but into the culture and operations of Sky Dominion Airlines as a whole. This was not vengeance. It was strategy born of foresight. For years, Elijah had observed patterns within the airline industry, patterns of exclusion, financial opacity, and ethical compromise. The incident at the lounge had merely provided the catalyst to bring those observations into focused action. At the center of the unfolding strategy stood Alexis Moore, head of global security for Sterling Innovations. A former intelligence officer, Moore possessed a meticulous mind and an instinct for anticipating threats before they materialized. Within hours of receiving Elijah's command, she had assembled a cross-disciplinary task force: cybersecurity specialists, forensic accountants, investigative journalists operating under non-disclosure agreements, and legal analysts versed in federal aviation law. Their objective was clear: uncover everything Sky Dominion sought to conceal and transform private indignity into public reckoning. Their findings surfaced with alarming speed. Beneath the glossy veneer of luxury travel and premium branding, Sky Dominion concealed a labyrinth of corruption. Maintenance records, hastily buried after safety violations, revealed aircraft kept in service despite known defects. Financial audits uncovered shell companies funneling profits offshore, bypassing tax obligations and concealing illicit transactions. Internal communications hinted at an unspoken policy of heightened scrutiny towards certain passengers in premium cabins, an unofficial yet deeply entrenched practice that mirrored Elijah's experience in the lounge. Each revelation added weight to a growing dossier, destined not for negotiation, but for exposure. Meanwhile, inside the airline, panic brewed behind closed doors. Rigid corporate hierarchies, accustomed to operating with impunity, faltered under the glare of public scrutiny. Cassandra Blake, the lounge manager whose actions had ignited the storm, found herself both scapegoated and quietly defended by executives unwilling to acknowledge systemic culpability. Official statements characterized her conduct as an aberration, an isolated lapse in judgment. Yet employees whispered in hushed tones about long-standing patterns of discriminatory enforcement, of unspoken directives that everyone knew yet no one dared articulate. Among those employees was Mark Lawrence, the young intern whose quick reflexes had captured the viral footage. In the days following the incident, Mark became an unlikely figure in the unfolding drama. His admiration for Elijah had transformed into quiet resolve, compelling him to act despite the risks. Late at night, in moments stolen between shifts, he sifted through internal memos, piecing together a trail of correspondence that revealed executives discussing cost-cutting at the expense of passenger safety and dismissing complaints about biased treatment as outlier noise. Mark understood the danger of what he was doing, yet the memory of Elijah's silent humiliation, the calm acceptance of indignity undeserved, fueled his determination. Elijah, for his part, moved deliberately. He issued no public statements, granted no interviews, and refused to feed the media frenzy swirling around his name. Instead, he allowed public outrage to build organically, untainted by defensive justifications or combative soundbites. His silence unnerved Sky Dominion executives, accustomed to adversaries who fought visibly and predictably. In that silence, Elijah gathered leverage, the kind measured not in headlines but in meticulously documented truths. As the investigation deepened, Alexis's team uncovered the crown jewel of Sky Dominion's corruption, a private communications network maintained by the airline's chief executive, Richard Ventnor. Through encrypted servers hidden from regulatory oversight, Ventnor and his inner circle had coordinated everything from financial malfeasance to covert lobbying efforts designed to stall safety reforms. Leaked emails revealed a chilling calculus: cost-benefit analyses weighing the expense of potential lawsuits against the savings from deferred maintenance, decisions where human lives were quantified as acceptable risk. Simultaneously, forensic accountants traced vast sums funneled through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, routed via shell corporations tied to political donors and private contractors. The picture that emerged was damning: a corporation, not merely negligent, but willfully corrupt, insulated by political connections and indifferent to the human cost of its actions. Public pressure, mounted as fragments of this evidence began to surface, strategically released to journalists and regulators in carefully timed waves. Each leak struck like a precision blow, eroding Sky Dominion's carefully cultivated image of prestige and reliability. Stock prices faltered, institutional investors whispered about leadership changes, and federal agencies quietly opened inquiries. What had begun as a viral moment of discrimination now threatened to unravel an entire corporate empire. Inside Sky Dominion's executive suite, chaos reigned. Ventnor convened emergency meetings, berating subordinates and demanding loyalty, even as cracks in the hierarchy widened. His attempts to discredit Elijah backfired spectacularly when forged documents, planted to suggest impropriety on Elijah's part, were traced back to the airline itself. Each misstep deepened public mistrust and emboldened those within the company who had long chafed under Ventnor's authoritarian rule. It was within this atmosphere of imploding authority that new alliances quietly formed. Mark, emboldened by the shifting tides, connected with employees disillusioned by years of ethical compromise. Among them were flight attendants, ground crew, and even mid-level managers who, though once silent, now found courage in collective dissent. Together, they funneled evidence to Elijah's team, transforming isolated grievances into a cohesive narrative of systemic failure. For Elijah, the unfolding chaos was not cause for celebration, but for careful calibration. His aim was never simple destruction, it was transformation. To dismantle Sky Dominion without offering an alternative would be to replicate the same cycles of harm under a different name. What he envisioned was bolder, a reclamation of the skies themselves, an airline reborn with principles of equity and dignity embedded in its very framework. As federal investigations closed in and shareholders demanded answers, Ventnor's grip weakened irreparably. Whispers of resignation swirled through boardrooms, fueled by plunging stock values and the growing inevitability of criminal indictments. Elijah watched from a calculated distance, timing each move with the precision of someone who understood that true power lay not in noise, but in patience. By the time the second wave of leaks hit documents detailing safety violations suppressed to avoid costly recalls, the outcome was inevitable. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. Regulators announced sweeping audits, and Sky Dominion's board convened an emergency session to consider leadership changes. For Ventnor, the fall from untouchable titan to embattled liability was swift and merciless. For Elijah, it was merely the midpoint of a strategy years in the making. As winter deepened in the holiday rush-filled airports across the nation, Sky Dominion teetered on the brink of collapse. In that precarious moment, Elijah prepared for the next phase, not the exposure of rot, but the construction of something new. The reckoning had come. Now came the transformation. The fall of Sky Dominion Airlines did not arrive with a single catastrophic event, but through a series of relentless blows, each revelation, a fracture in the edifice of arrogance that had shielded the company for decades. By the time federal investigators walked through the doors of its Atlanta headquarters with sealed warrants and subpoenas in hand, the airline was no longer a titan of industry, but a hollowed shell, its prestige stripped bare by exposure. In boardrooms once defined by opulent displays of wealth, panic replaced composure. Executives whispered behind closed doors, legal teams scrambled to salvage what remained, and the stock ticker on financial networks flashed in ceaseless decline. Richard Ventnor's removal as CEO marked the symbolic end of an era. His reign, sustained by political favors and hidden accounts, collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. Offshore transactions, falsified safety reports, and covert discriminatory directives no longer lingered as rumors. They stood documented in irrefutable detail, their authenticity verified by forensic audits and federal investigations. The board, desperate to preserve any semblance of stability, turned to the one executive who had quietly resisted Ventnor's worst impulses. Helen Voss, known for her principled objections buried in forgotten memos and her refusal to compromise safety for profit, she emerged as the reluctant yet inevitable choice to lead in the company's darkest hour. While the world fixated on the spectacle of Sky Dominion's implosion, Elijah Sterling focused on what would follow. His strategy had always extended beyond exposure. Dismantling corruption was only the first phase. The true victory lay in transformation, building an airline rooted not in exclusivity and silent prejudice, but in dignity and access for all. To achieve this, he moved with quiet precision, negotiating directly with institutional shareholders, calming regulatory bodies wary of monopolistic power, and outlining a vision of air travel that challenged long-held industry assumptions. The acquisition unfolded with remarkable speed. As Sky Dominion's valuation plummeted, Sterling Innovations seized the opportunity, purchasing controlling interest at a fraction of its former worth. Yet the terms of the deal were anything but predatory. Elijah committed publicly to preserving jobs, investing in modernizing fleets, and establishing an independent ethics division with genuine authority, a stark departure from the performative compliance programs that had previously shielded misconduct. For weary employees, long silenced by fear of retaliation, these promises signaled a cultural shift as profound as the corporate takeover itself. The rebranding was swift and deliberate. The name Sky Dominion, once synonymous with prestige, had become toxic, irrevocably tied to scandal. In its place rose Sterling Air, a name evoking not dominance but renewal, resilience, and shared ascent. Its new emblem, a stylized horizon, pierced by upward arcs, symbolized inclusion and progress, a visual commitment to leaving no passenger unseen. Where premium lounges once embodied exclusion, redesigned spaces prioritized comfort and respect for all travelers. Training programs addressed not only service, but the implicit biases that had fueled so many quiet indignities. At the heart of this transformation stood those whose courage had sparked it. Mark Lawrence, the intern whose recording ignited public outrage, transitioned from obscurity to a role in the newly formed passenger advocacy unit. His quiet conviction, once dismissed as naivete, now anchored policies ensuring no traveler endured what Elijah had faced. Erica Hughes, a gate agent who had broken ranks to support the truth, was elevated to oversee equality initiatives across the company's network, her lived experience shaping reforms more powerfully than any consultant's report. Even Victor Grant, the security supervisor caught between duty and conscience, found redemption in leading a restructured security team dedicated to fairness and transparency. Elijah himself remained a paradox in the public eye, admired yet enigmatic, celebrated yet reluctant to dwell in the spotlight. While media outlets clamored for interviews, he declined most, preferring quiet work to public spectacle. He viewed the airline not as a trophy won, but as a stewardship entrusted to him, a vessel through which systemic injustices might be confronted and reimagined. In private moments, he reflected on the improbable arc of his journey, from foster homes marked by uncertainty to boardrooms reshaping industries, from solitary equations scribbled in worn notebooks to a legacy altering the very skies. The inaugural launch of Sterling Air became a moment of collective catharsis. On a crisp spring morning, the same Washington National Airport that had borne witness to humiliation months earlier now hosted celebration. A crowd gathered on the tarmac, diverse in every measure, employees, activists, journalists, and ordinary travelers united in anticipation. Behind Elijah, the first aircraft bearing the new livery gleamed in the sunlight, its fuselage a testament to reclamation. The hush that fell as he approached the podium carried the weight of history. This was not merely a corporate rebranding, but a cultural reckoning. His address was devoid of theatrics, yet rich in conviction. He spoke of dignity as a right, not a privilege, of mobility as more than physical travel, but access to opportunity, of responsibility to communities long marginalized by industries built without their inclusion. He promised transparency, accountability, and a relentless pursuit of equity, not as marketing rhetoric, but as guiding principle. The applause that followed was not merely for the man, but for the vision, a collective yearning for something better than what had been. In the months that followed, tangible changes affirmed that the promises were not hollow. Diversity initiatives reshaped hiring pipelines, safety standards exceeded federal mandates, and partnerships with underserved communities provided pathways into aviation careers once deemed unattainable. Sterling Air introduced programs granting free flights to low-income students visiting colleges, turning air travel from luxury into possibility. Gradually, public perception shifted. What had begun in scandal evolved into a blueprint for ethical corporate reform. Meanwhile, Richard Ventnor's fall from grace reached its inevitable conclusion. Convicted on multiple counts of fraud and obstruction, he entered a federal facility far removed from the opulent boardrooms he once ruled. His name faded from headlines, a cautionary tale of hubris undone by truth. Cassandra Blake, whose actions had sparked the viral outrage, faced civil litigation and a lifetime of reflection, her legacy reduced to a footnote in the annals of corporate missteps. For Elijah, triumph carried no gloating, only quiet resolve. He visited his childhood neighborhood in Chicago's South Side, where cracked sidewalks and aging schools bore silent testimony to cycles of neglect. There he announced the Sterling Foundation's largest initiative yet, a multi-million-dollar investment in education, mentorship, and infrastructure aimed at dismantling the very barriers he had once faced. Standing in the school gymnasium, where he had once dreamed beyond his circumstances, he told the children before him that their worth was not defined by how the world perceived them, but by what they chose to build despite it. The inaugural flight of Sterling Air lifted into the sky months later, a symbolic passage from past to future. Elijah sat by the window in quiet reflection, watching the city shrink beneath the ascending wings. The hum of engines carried more than passengers. It carried a legacy forged through adversity, tempered by patience, and defined by transformation. Justice, he understood now, was not the destruction of enemies, but the creation of systems where dignity endured beyond individual battles. As the plane leveled above the clouds, sunlight bathed the cabin in golden warmth. Below lay the world as it had been. Ahead stretched the horizon as it could be. And in that space between memory and possibility, Elijah Sterling allowed himself, at last, a moment of peace. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of justice and redemption. And when you're done, check out our other stories, each one more unbelievable than the last. Which one will you watch next?